guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Tonight I'm going to read to you Lesson 1, The Nile River, from our book, Reading Essentials Guide. I don't own the rights to this book. I am just reading it for my kids at school. So if you can turn to page 41, we're going to start reading together. And I've taken pictures of the book and we're going to follow along with me as I read, okay? Alright, so here's a book. There's a book. Alright, so this first page is just an introduction page. You have the essential question here. How does geography influence the way people live? Which is very similar to our unit question. How does the environment impact civilizations? Our guiding questions are: why was the Nile River important to the ancient Egyptians? How did the ancient Egyptians depend on the Nile River to grow their crops? And how did Egypt become united? Our terms to know are cataracts, delta, shadoof, papyrus, hieroglyphics, and dynasty. Cataracts are dangerous, fast-moving waters. A delta is a fan-shaped area of marshy land near where a river flows into the sea. A shadoof is a bucket attached to a long pole used to move water for irrigation. A papyrus is a reed plant that grows along the Nile River. Think of like a hollow bamboo. That's the way I think of it. A hieroglyphic is a writing system that was made up by the Egyptians of pictures and sound symbols. Is very similar to the cuneiform. And a dynasty is a line of rulers from one family. And look at this map here. We're in the Fertile Crescent by the Mediterranean Sea, but this time we are actually in the continent of Africa. So we were over here for Mesopotamia, and now we're a little southern to the tip of Africa right here. And if you're looking at the timeline, the settlement of the Nile River began in 5000 BC. It's very old. And then their first kingdom is actually 2600 BC. Now remember, BC is moving backwards in time. So you've got 5000, then 2600, and then 1070. So it's going backwards. And then once you get to 0 is where we start going upwards. Okay? Alright, so let's go to the next page. I'm on page 42. Alright, ready? The Nile River Valley. By 5000 BC, hunters and gatherers had moved into the Nile River Valley. They settled there, farmed the land, and built villages. These people became the earliest Egyptians. Because Egypt gets little rainfall, Egyptians relied on the Nile River for water. They used its water for fishing, farming, cooking, and cleaning. The Nile River flows north from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, about 4,000 miles. Two rivers meet to form the Nile. They are the Blue Nile from Eastern Africa and the White Nile in Central Africa. The water forms rapids where the rivers meet. These are called cataracts. Large ships cannot sail through cataracts. If you remember from our activity today, those rapids, and I think of rapids like fast because I think of I'm rapidly moving, fast moving. So the number one, underline the reason the Egyptians had to rely on the Nile River for water. That's in this paragraph. And what are cataracts? That's also in this paragraph. In Egypt, the Nile runs through a narrow valley. Just before it reaches the Mediterranean Sea, it divides into many branches. These branches spread out over an area of rich soil. This area is called a delta. Deserts lie on both sides of the Nile River Valley. Because the deserts were so hot, the ancient Egyptians called them the Red Land, like red hot. Get it? These areas kept outside armies away from Egypt. To the south, dangerous cataracts blocked enemy boats. In the north, the delta marshes kept enemies from sailing into Egypt. So the second part, number 2 and number 3 are going to be in the part that I just read. The geography of Mesopotamia did not protect people in the same way. The deserts and rivers did not keep out the invaders. Mesopotamians constantly fought off attackers. Egypt rarely faced such threats. As a result, Egyptian civilization grew and prospered. I'm sorry, number 3 is actually in that part. How the Nile River helped the Egyptians. The river provided water for drinking and growing crops. Cataracts kept out invaders. Marshy delta also kept out enemies. The deserts and Nile rapids did not completely close Egypt to the outside world. The Mediterranean Sea was to the north. Beyond the desert to the east was the Red Sea. These waters allowed Egyptians to trade with others. Within Egypt, people used the Nile for trade and transportation. Winds from the north pushed sailboats south. The flow of the Nile carried them north. This made Egypt different from Mesopotamia. There, city-states constantly fought each other. Egyptian villages, however, had friendly contact. So number 4 says, how were the Egyptians protected by their physical environment, like water or deserts or mountains, just like we've been talking about in class. Okay, moving on to page 43. And you can pause this video and answer questions. You don't have to read it all with me. You can pause, answer questions, press play again. Do whatever you need to do. All right, we're on page 43. People of the river. Farmers in Mesopotamia never knew when the nearby rivers would overflow or if flooding would be bad. This made it difficult to farm there. In Egypt, the Nile River also flooded, but its floods were regular. Farmers did not have to worry about the floods. Farmers did not have to worry that floods would destroy crops or farms. Water came to the Nile from rain and melted snow. Then, during the summer, the Nile spilled over its banks. When the waters went down, they left a layer of dark, rich mud. The Egyptians became successful farmers. They planted wheat, barley, and flax seeds. They grew enough food to feed themselves and their animals. They used irrigation when the weather was dry. To trap floodwaters, Egyptian farmers first dug basins, or bowl-shaped holes, in the earth. Then they dug canals to carry water from the basins to the field. They also used a shaduf, a bucket on a long pole. It could lift water from the river into the basins. So I think of like a bowl, and then you've got like a straw leading the water out. So question number 5 says, why was irrigation easier for Egyptians than for Mesopotamians? Question 6 says, circle the items papyrus was used to make. So number 5 is in the first part that I read. Number 6 is coming up. How Egyptians farmed. They used rich soil brought by floods. They planted wheat, barley, and flax in wet soil. They irrigated during dry seasons. They dug basins and canals to catch water. They used shaduf to move water. Egyptians also developed ways to use papyrus. This was a reed plant that grew along the shores of the Niles. They harvested papyrus to make baskets, sandals, and river rafts. The Egyptians also used papyrus for making writing paper. Like Mesopotamians, Egyptians developed their own system of writing called hieroglyphics. Now, papyrus what they did was they wetted it, they soaked it in water, and then they kind of like pounded it out to make it thin, and then they mushed it together and then pounded it out again, and then they let it dry. Hieroglyphics, it was made of thousands of pictures and sound symbols. Some symbols stood for objects and ideas. For example, to communicate the idea of a boat, a scribe, if you remember, a scribe is someone who knows how to write, would draw a tiny boat. Other symbols stood for sounds, like the letters of our own alphabet. Number 7 says, what kind of writing system did the Egyptians develop? In ancient Egypt, few people could read and write. Some Egyptian men went to special schools to study reading and writing. They learned to become scribes or record keepers for the rulers, priests, and traders. Some hieroglyphics conveyed public messages. Scribes carved these into stone walls and monuments like Hammurabi's Code for everyday use. Scribes invented a similar script and wrote on papyrus. Number 8 is critical thinking, so you're going to have to think of this outside of the text. Why was it important for Egyptians to develop a system of writing? All right, going to our last page. Uniting Egypt. On page 44. Uniting Egypt. Skillful farming led to more food than was needed, or a surplus. This freed some people to work as artisans instead of farmers. Artisans wove cloth, made pottery, and carved statues. They also shaped copper into weapons and tools. Now Egyptians had goods for trade. First, they traded with each other. Then they traveled to Mesopotamia to trade. There they may have learned new ideas about writing and government. Irrigation systems needed to be built and maintained. Grain had to be stored. Disputes over land needed to be settled. Over time, a government formed in Egypt. By 4000 BC, Egypt was made of 2 large kingdoms. Lower Egypt was in the north in the Nile Delta. Upper Egypt was in the south along the Nile River. And y'all, this always bothered me. The Lower Egypt is in the north and Upper Egypt is in the south. We don't get it. But the Nile actually flows from south to north, so maybe they're going the direction of the Nile. That makes sense. Like the river flows towards the Mediterranean Sea, which is north in that sense. All right, next paragraph. About 3100 BC, Narmer was king of Upper Egypt. He led his armies north and took control of Lower Egypt. Narmer's kingdoms stayed together long after his death. His family passed power from father to son to grandson. This is called a dynasty. Over time, ancient Egypt would be ruled by 30 dynasties over a period of 2,800 years. Whoa. Historians group Egypt's dynasties into 3 main areas: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Each kingdom had a long period of strong leadership and safety. Number 9 says, why did Egypt need an organized government? Number 10 says, how did the separate kingdoms of Egypt unite? We don't have to do number 11. Check for understanding. List 3 ways that the Egyptians used the Nile River. I'm going to go back to pages 42, 43. And list 2 ways that Narmer changed Egypt. That's right here. Alright guys, don't forget to do your reading from today, the essay, the background essay. Make sure you get that done. And check back tomorrow for lesson 2, Life in Ancient Egypt. Thanks for watching.